Good morning, good day, good evening, good night, wherever you're watching the video. I appreciate you dialing in and watching another video. As always, if you have any questions or comments about these videos, you can hit us up over on the Facebook page, or you can go to our website, webbaptist.com, leave us a message or prayer request, whatever concern you have, let us know. We'll be glad to get back to you as soon as we possibly can. As always, if you can like and subscribe to the channel, that'll help us. And you'll get notified every time that we do a new video. Today's person of the Bible that I'm looking at is Pontius Pilate. And the reason why we're kind of doing these characters that are closely related to the later times of Jesus's life, subsequent trial and crucifixion, is because this kind of parallels what we're going through with the Bible study at this time. So we've done Herod the Great, we've done Herod Antipas, and now we're doing Pontius Pilate. So looking at this person, we kind of ask ourselves, well, what kind of person is this? What kind of history did he have outside of this experience with Jesus, this trial with Jesus? And we kind of give an idea of the people behind the story, so to speak, because sometimes it's nice to know where these people are coming from, what motivates them, and what happens after they have their encounters with these people in the Bible or these events of the Bible. So when we look at Pontius Pilate, you got to remember now when we're looking through a lot of this stuff, I'm not going to sit here and break out extensive notes or sources and that kind of stuff. I'm not going verbatim on a lot of this. As always, I'm not getting too far in the weeds or the minutia when it comes to a lot of this stuff. What I'm doing is I'm painting with broad strokes to give you an idea, hopefully for you to dig a little bit deeper in your research. And if you don't want to research, that's fine too. So getting into Pontius Pilate, who was this guy? What was he before and after his encounter with Jesus at the trial and crucifixion? And so we want to look at that, and we know that he was the 5th governor of the Roman province of Judea. Now, obviously, this is a Roman province, and they needed someone to control. And you may say to yourself, well, isn't that what Herod the Great and Herod Antipas was? Well, Herod the Great was a king. Antipas was a tetrarch, which was a 1/4 ruler of the people. Now, Rome didn't mind them having their kings, having their priests, and having their people in positions of authority. However, Rome wanted someone there to keep an eye on their interests, and that's what he was. So he was a governor. Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor of this province. So he was in control of that. Now, of course, he's best known for the trial and order and the execution of Jesus. So what is the character beyond that? Because we don't see or hear from him ever again in the Bible. So the sources that we have is kind of weird, and it can be kind of frustrating. They're either direct, of course, with the Bible, what the Bible tells us with the detailed interaction he has with Jesus, or we have secondhand knowledge, which, of course, comes from Eusebio and Josephus, and we'll get into the stuff afterwards as far as his reign goes. And we really don't have much source in regards to the man himself, but we can kind of build some of the idea of who he is based on the Roman records that we have on everything else. So the sources can be kind of weird, so to speak, and a lot of scholars, for the most part, have opinions, and not necessarily something that they can point to saying definitively what this person was all about. So now we look at the beginnings of this guy. Obviously, like I said, there's no record of his early life, so we really don't know anything about him before he becomes governor. Okay, but what we can figure out and what we can do is when we look at the name, scholars look at the name Pontius, we kind of get an idea that he was probably from a family or a group of people from the central or southern region there in Italy. And so that may be where he's from. Now, being Roman and being a governor, chances are that he was likely well educated and middle class wealthy. So, I mean, he probably hit his glass ceiling with the governorship, so to speak. And that, being that he was probably his family and where he came from was middle class, that's a good indication of where he's at. Obviously, if he was very poor, he would have a lot of strikes against him as far as moving up that ladder. I think that him coming from the middle class is best. It's probably the best way to look at it. Now we also got to look at the fact that he might have been connected by his father politically, socially, but we don't know that. We don't have anything that points to that. His father or he had some military background based on the name Pilate. So Pilate. So when he looks at that, the Pilate name is Pilatus means javelin, and it's more of a name that you get from what you're good at in the military, so to speak, at that time. So now, since Augustus at that time, the emperor, set a decree that those who are in office must have some kind of military background or experiences, I think it's safe to say that Pontius Pilate did serve in the Roman military. To what extent, we don't know. Based on the emperor's decree, when he established that decree, he said that they, in order to be in a position of power, you got to serve in the military. So what to that extent, we don't know. But what we do know is Pilate, chances are Pilate came from a decent middle class, wealthy middle class, and he probably served in the military for some period of time before he became a governor. So of course he was married, and we'll get into the wife and the dream that she had of Jesus here shortly. So now when we look at his governorship, okay, so Josephus in Antiquities 1842, book first. He's the fifth governor for about 10 years, which is pretty impressive, given the length of political life and the turmoil going on around this time. So he had a relatively low, prestigious job and no record of how he obtained this. So it wasn't. It's like with, when we looked at Herod the Great and we look at Herod Antipas, we kind of get an idea of how they got into those positions of one being a king, the other a tetrarch. So we kind of get an idea of that. But with Pilate, we don't know whether he got it through political favors with his father or with him, or if he just earned it on his own. We don't know that. So we just know that he was the fifth governor of Judea for about 10 years. His title was prefect, which implies he had a military as well as a police role. Okay, so for the most part, like I said, the Jewish people had their king in Herod the Great, and after that you had the tetrarchs, which were Herod and his brothers, and Philip, and I forgot the other guy's name. Lose his train of thought. So they had those leaders for their people, but Rome still had to have people there in that province for Roman's interests. Now, Rome didn't allow the people in their territories to do certain things, like, for instance, capital punishment. That was reserved for Rome. Only Rome could kill people in the provinces. Which is why they had to get the Pharisees had to get Pilate involved in the trial of Jesus Christ, because they could not crucify him on their own. Plus, they thought, since the blood's not on their hands, they would be absolved of that crime. So, but anyway, back to what we're talking about. So he had military and police role. So he kind of kept the peace, so to speak. He was the sheriff of the province, and along with some other political things that he had to do. He had to maintain order. He had to make sure the taxes were coming in, maintain order, which means keeping the peace. Those are the two things that the Rome wanted more than anything. They wanted peace and they wanted the money, because on their boundaries, if you look at a map of the Roman Empire, they had several skirmishes, and they had enemies beyond their borders. So they had to be on the ready for that, or they were pushing those borders, and expanding their empire. So So as governor, he was head of the judicial system for that province, responsible for taxes, distributing funds and shares, a limited amount of civil and religious power within the Jewish Sanhedrin. Okay, so he could control what's going on a little, to some extent, some of the Jewish Sanhedrin. So long as, I think I would interpret that as far as so long as this Jewish Sanhedrin and leaders in the temple obeyed Romans' concerns, that'd be okay. If there was any announcement of uprising and troublemaking, trouble brewing, and anything going against the emperor, then he would step in and have to do something about that. So that's where I think that he doesn't exalt. He's not supposed to exalt his authority unless it needs to be done. He had the right to appoint the high priest, and by doing that, of course, he had some political sway with the priest and the priestess, because if he appoints a high priest, now he couldn't pick just anybody. Obviously, he had to pick up from the group of the priests there, which one would be the high priest, and sometimes a governor would go on the recommendation of the priesthood. All indications I get, Pilate didn't care what anybody thought, so long as he elected someone that would listen to what he would say. It really didn't matter, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So he had a somewhat difficult relationship with Antipas when you look at some of this stuff, and you look at some of the sources outside of the Bible. There was some tension, there was some friction between all parties involved in this. Obviously, the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they didn't care anything for Roman control, so you always have that underlying current of friction. And so he was kind of the thorn in their side or the dust in their eye the whole time, and they couldn't get rid of it. But at the same time, he was a necessary evil because Rome was in control of the world. So what they say, that's what went, okay? And so they had to deal with that, and they had to learn to cope with that. And, Herod the Great and then Herod Antipas and his brothers, they had to fall in line with that too. Now, they had those, Herod Antipas, for instance, had to, ride the fence as far as keeping Rome happy and keeping the Jewish people happy. And a lot of times that failed as well, so you couldn't do both. So, the largely given free reign since the governor of Syria, Lucius Aelius or Lamia, was absent from the region for almost 5 years. Okay, so if we look at the territory of the Judean Empire, it wasn't like there was a hierarchy of power. Okay, so in this region, the Judea region was not by itself. It wasn't by, it just wasn't the center of the world. So you had Judea, but it was part of a larger, area to control. So Pontius Pilate was a governor, but his immediate boss was in Syria, okay? And that's where Lucius Aelius Lamia was in control. Now, this is a Roman general and governor of Syria. So why was he absent? Well, a lot of people believe, a lot of scholars believe he was either absent because he was in Rome, or being that Syria on their eastern front, of course, you're looking at the Parthian dynasty and empire to the east, and he was pretty much preoccupied with that, as well as some of the tribes of the north that he had to fend off and keep those borders. So while Syria was a big place, it looks like the Syrian governorship up there was preoccupied with border disputes and all that stuff. So with him being absent for 5 years of of Pilate's rule or governorship, he pretty much had no one that he had to answer to. And so we'll get in that in a minute, where he didn't have to answer to anybody, and that was, he took advantage of that, so to speak. So now we look at the problems with his rule. We look at some of the issues outside. When we start looking at Philo's embassy to Gaius, and we look at the antiquity of the Jews, we see certain things that are documented that are a problem, and that kind of paints us a larger picture of just who Pilate is. So if we look at Philo's embassy to Gaius, number 38, Pilate offended a lot of Jewish people, Jewish law, by bringing golden shields into the Jerusalem and placing them in Herod's palace. What was the deal with the shield? It was just against the law. You didn't bring weapons, you didn't bring shields, you didn't bring that kind of stuff into the city there in Jerusalem. And now Pilate refused to remove them. He wanted to keep them there. He says, I'm not worried about y'all. Forget y'all. I don't care about your religion. But the Jewish priests and the people raised so much concern about this that they petitioned the emperor about this problem, and the emperor told Pilate, remove the shields and quit being a problem. So Pilate got reprimanded for that. Okay, it was something simple, and part of the problem is Pilate did that at nighttime when he brought the shield in, so he kind of knew that this was going to be a problem. Why did he even bring him in? Who knows? But what we do know is it was a problem. The Jewish people had a problem with it. You don't bring weapons, you don't bring that kind of stuff into the city of Jerusalem. It's a holy city. And here you are bringing in this stuff without provocation. And they didn't like that. And so they complained all the way up to the emperor. And the emperor's like, remove them, fool. So he got reprimanded for that. Again, that's in Philo's work. And then Antiquity of the Jews by Josephus. The Jews were upset that Pilate wanted to use some of the temple money to build an aqueduct. Now, we don't know where the aqueduct was going, what it was exactly for. What we do know is the mob was pretty upset with it. So, Pilate took some money that was used and earmarked for the temple only, and said, no, I'm going to build an aqueduct with this money since y'all are not using it and you got a surplus, whatever the case may be. Well, the mob didn't like that at all. And I'm pretty sure that mob was probably started by the priests, because they're good at stirring up trouble, as we see with the trial of Jesus. And so the mob was protesting this. So when they started working on the aqueduct, this mob gathered around and they're protesting and they're throwing rocks and they're acting crazy. Well, what does Pilate do? Well, Pilate decides to send in troops and use clubs and trample the mob with the horses. So there wasn't a big slaughter or anything, but a few people died, and it was just another bad mark on him. And finally, he had to relent to keep the peace. So, but now, did the aqueduct get done? We don't know, because again, we don't know where this aqueduct was at. What we do know is this action did take place. But you kind of get an idea when you look at these things where the Jewish people, the Judean people are starting to rebel and push back against these rulers. All this stuff's going to be leading to the first Roman-Jewish war. And when that happens around 70 AD, of course, that's when the temple is destroyed. So that's what we're looking at. Now, again, we look at, what is it that Pilate's known for? Jesus of Nazareth, the trial and everything. So when we look at this, the gospel portrays Pilate somewhat reluctant to execute Jesus and pressured to do so by the crowds and the Jewish authorities. So I think when I look at this, when we look at the Gospels, there's a lot of different takes on what exactly happened from the time that Jesus was arrested to his trial and to the crucifixion. So when we look at these things, all are complicit. All of them are involved in the final decision to crucify Jesus Christ. Now, we see Pilate, what is he? Is he hesitating because of what? Is he hesitating because he believes who Jesus is? No, I don't think that's the case. I think what he's hesitating to do is because this is a Judean holiday. This is Passover, okay? So you're going to have a lot of people coming in. You don't want to upset the natives, so to speak. He wants to try to keep the peace. He doesn't want any trouble or anybody talking back to Rome or the emperor or the Syrian governorship about his rule. So he's wanting to keep the peace as best he can, and he'll strong arm if he needs to. Well, here he is. I think, right before the holiday was supposed to start, And you already got 3 guys that you're going to go ahead and crucify and put them on the main road for people to see as they come into the temple or into the gates of Jerusalem. Well, then all of a sudden, here comes the priest with this guy who claims to be the Messiah, the Emperor, the King of Kings, and they want him dead. Okay, so he's got to figure out, I think his reluctance comes from the fact that he knew Jesus was not worth, the cross. Now, we can flog him, we can beat him and throw him in jail and then send him on his way, but he hasn't done anything. Well, obviously the priests were making the case that he was trying to overthrow Rome, not just the temple. And of course, when you start dragging in the emperor, you start dragging in Rome, it becomes a completely different issue. And we see in the Gospels where, Pilate tells, the crowd, they choose Barabbas over Jesus and that kind of stuff. So we see that, but, no matter how you look at it, was Pilate kind of caught in the middle of all this? Probably so. But you got to remember, he was the ultimate authority of whether or not Jesus was going to be executed or crucified. So in many ways, he is complicit. He could have easily said, no, I'm not doing this. But at the same time, that contentious relationship between him and the friction between him and the priest and the Sanhedrin, and to some extent, Herod Antipas, all that kind of keeps, here's a guy, he's just trying to keep the peace. Maybe a little bit smart, maybe not. He knows if nothing's done, he's going to be in trouble. If he doesn't do anything, they're going to complain to the emperor because you didn't kill this seditious person who speaks out against Rome. So, at the end of the day, he kind of waffled on the issue, and he wasn't strong. He was at a point he didn't care, in my opinion. So when you read about you can go in the Gospels and read that part. I don't have to give you the details on that. Now, I will say that his wife had a dream in Matthew 27:19. When we look at that, what are we seeing here in 27:19? While he was sitting in judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, have nothing to do with this man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. Okay, well, but moving on, verse 20, but the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should try and ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. So, and so he went along with having them make a choice. And of course, they chose Barabbas over Jesus. Now, what was the purpose of the dream? In my humble opinion, because there's really nothing more to say or before or after that. We don't know where the dream come from. Did God put the dream in her mind or Satan? In my opinion, that at this point in time, it was, the crucifixion had to happen in order for our salvation. And so, I think that this is one of those things where probably Satan has something to do with that. He probably put the dream in her mind, because if Jesus was to die and he could secure the souls of men through the cross, well, Satan wouldn't have any control over that whatsoever. The cross has always been God's plan. So giving her a dream and trying to deviate from the plan of the cross wouldn't make any sense. Why would God put that? I think this is more of one of many Satan's attempts to keep Christ from going to the cross. I think by this time he figured out, I'm in trouble and I can't let this happen. So, but anyway, Pilate is the short things that we know in regards to the Gospels and Pilate is we know more about that situation than we know anything else about Pilate. And what we're seeing is a guy that can be kind of cruel. He's kind of obstinate, kind of a political bully to his constituents. And I think that, at the time he's looking at the situation with Jesus as kind of a inconvenience. He's ready for a holiday. It'd be a weekend where the Jewish people would observe a religious holiday, and they would be quiet for once, and he can enjoy that peace instead of trying to police the area, so to speak. So Pilate was probably hesitant to kill Jesus because of the Passover crowd and the large population. And he probably knew Jesus was a bit popular among the crowds. I'm sure he's heard of the name. He's heard of it because there was all kinds of people inciting rebellion and prophets and that kind of stuff out in the desert. And so, he didn't. I think that he probably saw there wasn't enough to crucify the man. But hey, if that's what the priests want, we'll go ahead and go with it, and y'all leave me alone. Now, if we look at his removal from office and later on in life, we kind of get a different story. So now we look at the Antiquity of Jews by Josephus, 18:4-12, book 18:4. Pilate was removed from governorship because of an incident that happened with some armed Samaritans in a village near Mount Gerizim. So the Samaritans were digging up from what was listed. They were doing some digging up, trying to find some stuff for Moses. They were doing an archaeological dig. I don't think it was necessary to that extent, but they were trying to dig up something that they thought was there. Okay, so the armed Samaritans, okay, they're not supposed to be armed. But anyway, but Pilate sent in a bunch of guards and troops to this area, and he slaughtered a good bit of them. They had killed them because they were armed and they needed to be disarmed. And so they complained to the governorship at that time of Syria, which was Lucius Vitellius the elder. They complained to him that this slaughter wasn't necessary. All they had to do is say, lay down your arms. That's what we're doing. We were too busy digging up some relics of Moses that we thought was here. Was that true? We don't know. They could have been armed, rebellious insurrectionists hiding weapons or stashing weapons, for all we know. But the fact of the matter is, Pilate sent an armed group of his soldiers out there, and they slaughtered a good bit of them. So this incident, we don't know the details beyond that. What we know is this incident was the cause for Pilate to be recalled. So they petitioned to complain to the governor of Syria, who had Pilate recalled to Rome to be judged by Tiberius, who was the emperor at that time. So it was a grievous enough of a matter that it deserved the emperor's attention. Okay, so they were like, all right, Pilate, you did something wrong here, and the emperor needs to decide what to do with you. So Lucius Vitellius tells him, you need to go to Rome, and Tiberius will see how to handle what you're doing. Okay, so now on his way to Rome, back to Rome, Tiberius dies. So now you have Pilate going back to Rome to answer for some deeds that were done, but the king or the emperor who was supposed to address him is dead. So now Tiberius was followed by Caligula, and he would have ruled over the case for Pilate. But there's no record that was done. So when we look at the emperors, and we stop and look at this, so for the most part, everything is obscure, and records are pretty much either secondary or guessing at this point. So what happened to Pilate's case? Well, it's been Roman tradition with the emperors that they normally don't follow up or with anything that the other emperor was doing. So if Tiberius, said, "Hey, bring him to me to Rome, so we can, answer, so he can answer for what he did," well, Caligula doesn't care. He's not going to follow up. But that way, that absolves them of the responsibility of the previous emperor. So a lot of times in Rome, they didn't care what the other emperor did, because the emperor now is going to go a completely different direction. So he didn't really look at that. So there's no record of anything being done in regards to Pilate. But it is safe to say that his career ended badly. It ended on a bad note because he was being recalled, and chances are, if he's being recalled, it's going to be one of two things that's going to happen. One, he's going to be asked to commit suicide, or he's going to be exiled. So, or he's going to be exiled and asked to commit suicide. So, it's a disgrace that he was being recalled to begin with. So, it's not likely that he would have been said, "Okay, you explained yourself. You can go back to Judea." He never go back after he was recalled, and just the fact of being recalled is disgraceful enough. So we don't really know if he committed suicide, or if he was exiled, or if he retired. Like most, you got to remember now, he did 10 years, and it was probably time for him to either have a new posting or to retire as a public official. So his career probably ended in disgrace. Best case scenario, he retired and you hear nothing else about him. Worst case scenario, he was either executed or asked to commit suicide based on the fact that his political career ended in disgrace. But we really don't know at that point what happened to him. Now, Eusebius in Church History 271 suggests that Pilate committed suicide due to disgrace he was being recalled to Rome, or was exiled and committed suicide, but there's no proof of that. So, I mean, I understand what he's saying, but for the most part, Eusebius is coming at this from, a few decades later. Now, let's stop and look at this. When we look at, there's two different views of Pilate, and I'm going to wrap this up here in a minute. We got two different views of Pilate. One, we got the view of the Western side of the church, who looks at him being complicit and involved in the execution of Jesus Christ. We also have the Eastern portion of the church that looks at him as, no, he's not. He's absolved of that, and it's strictly all the Jews. And you're probably wondering, what do you mean by Eastern and Western church? Well, about the time, about 1,000 years, or shortly after, from the time that Jesus, from the Acts and when the passing away of the disciples and the apostles, and then you start getting into the formation of the church, there's a lot of stuff that they could not agree on. And what I mean by that is the Western side, which is primarily in Rome, and the Eastern side, which is primarily in Constantinople. So you had two power entities kind of emerging in this church, and eventually they would split. And we'll cover all that in later videos. But looking at the history, the Western Christianity, he was an important figure to both pagan and Christian propaganda in the early days of the church. And this is before the Bible is set and what we know today. Reason why he was looked and vilified, for the most part, because of the persecution of Christian and denunciation of Christ. But none of those records survived. We have them by secondhand sources, and we can't go to something directly and say, this is what Pilate was doing. Did he persecute Christians? There's no record of that. But it's hinted at in regards to Western Christianity by, like I said, pagan and Christian propaganda at that time. Now, the Eastern Christian church, usually Egypt, Ethiopia, Tertullian was a scholar at that time. He claimed to see Pilate's report to Tiberius, and Pilate was already a Christian in conscience. So it sounded like, when you look at that he was trying to say, well, he was actually a good guy. He was a Christian, he just never admitted it. It was kind of a weird. Now, if we look at the Apocrypha, and we'll go over those books later, Gospel of Peter, Herod Oedipus is guilty of Jesus' crucifixion and not Pilate. Other references put him in a good light and absolve him of Jesus' death. So, but if I read the Bible and I see what's going on there, he's just as complicit, and it's Roman soldiers and decision that ultimately caused the crucifixion. So some of this he's more of a mid-manager level type politician with little to no achievements. Was he power hungry? I think all of them were at that time. They were all looking to advance where they could. But to me, he seemed like he was a big fish in a small pond. What I mean by that is he had a lot of power, he had a lot of control, he had a lot of sway, and he wanted to keep it that way. He was hard and he was kind of brutal with his subjects, and they complained. They had a right to complain to the governorship of Syria and ultimately to Rome. But he was also skillful, competent, and manipulative, as from what some of the things that we see. Now, he was cruel and he was stubborn at times, according to sources outside the Gospels. Now, he's forever going to be known with the trial of Jesus. And so, regardless of what else that he does, that's what we know Pilate for, is what he does in regards to Jesus. So, but that's a nutshell version of exactly who Pontius Pilate really is. The sources I use: Wiki for the dates, the Bible, of course. You see the works of Josephus, Eusebius, and Philo. I looked at some of their stuff. Again, the notes that we have are very truncated at best. So, and even those can be kind of questionable at times. So when you go and you research something about Pilate, most people are going to go on just the studies of the things around him, of the culture, and not necessarily, because they have nothing to go on in regards to the man or his accomplishments by itself. Okay? All right, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please let us know over on our Facebook page or go to our website and leave a comment over there and just get in touch with us. If you have any questions, as always, like and subscribe to the videos. It helps us with the growth of the channel. And we appreciate everything you're doing. We'd love to have you here at Webb Baptist. If you can make it here for a service, please join us. We'd love to have you here. If you can't make it at Webb Baptist, join a Bible-based church wherever you are at and get plugged in and see what God's got in store for you. And as always, take care and God bless.